In the shadows of human civilization, lurking at the edges of firelight and flickering candles, there exists a creature that has haunted our collective consciousness for thousands of years. The vampire. Neither fully alive nor completely dead, these beings occupy a liminal space that has fascinated and terrified us across cultures and centuries. But where did this enduring myth truly originate? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of history, folklore, and fear to uncover the real story behind one of humanity's most captivating monsters. The vampire, as we know it today, bears only a passing resemblance to its ancient ancestors. These weren't the suave, aristocratic figures in evening wear that populate our modern imagination. The original vampires were creatures born from humanity's desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable, to give form to the invisible forces of disease and death that stalked communities without warning or mercy. Our journey begins not in the misty forests of Transylvania, but in the cradle of civilization itself, ancient Mesopotamia, that fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, gave birth to some of the earliest recorded vampire-like entities. Written on clay tablets that survived millennia, stories emerged of creatures that would make even modern horror fans shudder. The Ekimmu was one such terror. Its very name meant snatcher, and the ancient Mesopotamians believed these were the vengeful spirits of the improperly buried dead. Imagine dying far from home, your body left to the elements without the sacred rites that would grant your soul passage to the afterlife. Your spirit, trapped between worlds, would return as an Ekimmu, desperate and dangerous. These entities didn't necessarily drink blood in the way we imagine vampires doing today, but they drained the life force from the living, spreading disease and death wherever they manifested. The Mesopotamians lived in constant awareness of these spirits. Every funeral, every burial ritual, every prayer spoken over the deceased served a dual purpose. Yes, it honored the dead, but more importantly, it prevented them from returning as something twisted and hungry. When epidemics swept through cities, when people wasted away from mysterious illnesses, the Ekimmu were blamed. They were the invisible enemy, the explanation for tragedies that otherwise had no explanation. But perhaps more terrifying than the Ekimmu was Lilitu, a demon whose legend would evolve and spread far beyond Mesopotamia's borders. Ancient texts describe Lilitu as a creature of the night, often depicted with wings and bird-like feet. She was said to prey primarily on children and pregnant women, drinking their blood and stealing their vitality. Some scholars believe Lilitu may have been inspired by the high rates of infant and maternal mortality in the ancient world. When a child died in the night or a mother failed to survive childbirth, Lilitu provided an answer, however horrifying. The legend of Lilitu would eventually transform into the Jewish demon Lilith, who appears in various forms throughout religious texts. Described as Adam's first wife in some traditions, Lilith refused to submit to Adam's authority and fled Eden, becoming a night demon who preyed on newborns and seduced men in their sleep. This evolution shows how vampire myths adapted and changed as they moved between cultures, always reflecting the fears and anxieties of the societies that told them. Archaeological evidence supports these beliefs weren't mere superstition to the ancient peoples. Excavated pottery shards from ancient Persia show depictions of demons attempting to drink blood from men. These weren't abstract concepts or literary devices. For the people who created these images, the threat was real and immediate. They inscribed protective spells, wore amulets, and performed elaborate rituals to ward off these blood-drinking entities. The Babylonian goddess Lamashtu presents another fascinating example of vampiric mythology from this era. Often depicted with a lion's head and a donkey's body, Lamashtu was invoked in numerous incantations as a malicious entity who subsisted on the blood of babies and caused harm to mothers. Ancient texts describe her as a daughter of heaven, suggesting she may have been a fallen deity of some kind, adding a tragic dimension to her monstrous nature. People created protective amulets bearing the image of the demon Pazuzu, believed to be powerful enough to drive Lamashtu away from households. As we move westward and forward in time, ancient Greece and Rome contributed their own versions of vampiric entities to the growing mythology. These weren't undead creatures in the modern sense, but they shared the fundamental characteristic that would define vampires. They sustained themselves on human life essence. The Empusa was a creature of particular terror in Greek mythology. Described as a daughter of the goddess Hecate, Empusa possessed bronze feet and the ability to transform herself into a beautiful young woman. Her hunting method was insidious. She would appear to men as they slept, seducing them in their dreams before feeding on their blood. The Greeks understood something profound about the nature of fear. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who don't announce themselves with fangs and claws, but instead approach with beauty and desire. Lamia's story adds a layer of tragedy to the vampire myth. According to legend, Lamia was once a beautiful queen who caught the attention of Zeus himself. Their affair enraged Zeus's wife Hera, who responded by killing all of Lamia's children. Mad with grief and rage, Lamia transformed into a monster who preyed on the children of others, drinking their blood in an endless cycle of vengeance. This narrative introduces a concept that would become central to vampire mythology: the idea that vampires are created through suffering and loss, that they are as much victims as villains. The Greeks also told stories of the Striges, creatures described as having the bodies of crows or birds. These beings would feast on children and adults alike, descending from the darkness to drain their victims. When the Romans adopted this myth, the Striges became known as Strix, nocturnal birds that fed on human flesh and blood. The concept of vampires as shapeshifters, particularly into flying creatures, has roots in these ancient tales. What's fascinating about the Greek and Roman vampire precursors is how they were integrated into the broader mythological framework. These weren't isolated monsters, but part of a complex ecosystem of supernatural beings. They existed alongside heroes and gods, and their stories often served as cautionary tales about the consequences of hubris, betrayal, and forbidden love. The vampire myth wasn't confined to Europe and the Mediterranean. Across the world, cultures developed their own versions of blood-drinking or life-draining entities, each reflecting local fears and beliefs. In ancient China, the Jiangshi presented a distinctly different take on the undead. These creatures were corpses reanimated through the power of sorcery, distinguished by their stiff-limbed movement and distinctive hopping gait. The Jiangshi couldn't bend their bodies, so they moved by jumping, their arms outstretched before them. They were said to be created when a person died far from home and couldn't be properly buried, or when their body was struck by lightning. Unlike Western vampires, Jiangshi were often portrayed as tragic figures, trapped in death and unable to find peace. Hindu mythology contributed the Rakshasa, shape-shifting demons with an appetite for human flesh and blood. These beings could take any form they desired, often appearing as beautiful humans to deceive their prey. The Rakshasa weren't simply mindless monsters, but intelligent, cunning creatures capable of complex planning and manipulation. Some were portrayed as evil by nature, while others were more ambiguous, suggesting that even in ancient times, storytellers understood that monsters could exist on a spectrum. In Norse mythology, the Draugr served as guardians of burial mounds and treasure, reanimated corpses with superhuman strength and the ability to shapeshift. The Draugr were often depicted as bloated and blackened, their bodies showing the signs of death even as they moved and hunted. They could swell to enormous size or shrink to hide in small spaces. Most terrifyingly, they possessed intelligence and malice, remembering their lives and pursuing vendettas against those who had wronged them. Persian tales spoke of blood-drinking demons that predated many other vampire traditions. These entities were believed to emerge at night to drain the blood of men, and protective rituals were developed to ward them off. The consistency of these beliefs across such diverse cultures suggests something profound. The vampire myth speaks to universal human fears about death, disease, and the violation of the natural order. While vampire-like creatures existed in many cultures, the vampire as we recognize it today emerged primarily from Slavic folklore. The first known written reference to vampires appeared in Old Russian in the year 1047, soon after Orthodox Christianity spread into Eastern Europe. The term used was upir, and its etymology remains debated, though some scholars suggest it might literally mean the thing at the feast or sacrifice. This naming convention is significant. Upir may have been a euphemism, a way of referring to the creature without speaking its true name aloud. This practice, common in folklore, suggests a deep-seated fear that naming something gave it power or might attract its attention. The real name of the creature, if it ever existed, has been lost to history. In Slavic belief, the distinction between body and soul was fundamental to understanding the vampire. While the soul departed at death under certain circumstances, the body could become reanimated. This wasn't possession by a demon, as some other cultures believed, but rather a corruption of the corpse itself. The vampire was the body without the soul, animated by malevolent forces and driven by an insatiable hunger. Several conditions could create a vampire in Slavic tradition. The most common was improper burial. If the sacred rites weren't performed correctly, or if the deceased had been excommunicated from the church, their body might rise as a vampire. Those who died violently, committed suicide, or were killed in acts of treachery were also at risk. In some traditions, anyone born with certain physical anomalies, such as a caul over their face or teeth already present, might be destined to become a vampire after death. The characteristics of Slavic vampires differed markedly from our modern conception. These creatures were described as bloated and ruddy or darkish in color, their bodies swollen with the blood they had consumed. They wore burial shrouds and were often discovered lying in pools of fresh blood when their graves were opened. Far from the pale, aristocratic figures we imagine today, these were corpses in an apparent state of preservation, which terrified the living who encountered them. Slavic communities developed elaborate rituals to prevent and combat vampirism. Bodies might be buried face down so that if they tried to dig their way out, they would burrow deeper into the earth. Garlic and wild roses were placed in graves. In some cases, the deceased's tendons would be severed to prevent them from walking. If a vampire was suspected, the grave would be exhumed and the corpse examined. Signs of vampirism included lack of decomposition, fresh blood around the mouth, and the growth of hair and nails after burial. The vampire prevention and hunting practices were documented in legal codes. Serbian law from the 14th century actually banned vampire burials and the desecration of graves. This tells us two important things. First, that vampire beliefs were widespread and deeply held, and second, that authorities, both secular and religious, were struggling to combat these beliefs. The church particularly opposed vampire hysteria, viewing it as pagan superstition that undermined Christian teachings about death and the afterlife. Yet, despite official opposition, vampire beliefs persisted and even intensified. The stage was set for an event that would transform local folklore into a continental phenomenon, the Great Vampire Epidemic of the 18th century. The early 18th century was supposed to be an age of reason and enlightenment. Science was advancing, superstition was being challenged, and educated Europeans prided themselves on their rational worldview. Then came the vampires, and reason went out the window. The panic began with an outbreak of alleged vampire attacks in East Prussia in 1721. Reports spread of people dying mysteriously after claiming they had been visited by the dead. But it was two cases from Serbia that would capture the imagination of all Europe and spark a genuine mass hysteria. In 1725, in the village of Kisiljevo, a man named Petar Blagojevic died suddenly. Within days, 9 more villagers had died, and the survivors swore that Blagojevic had returned in the night to drain their blood. When his grave was exhumed, witnesses reported that his body showed no signs of decomposition. Fresh blood surrounded his mouth, and his nails and hair appeared to have grown after burial. Terrified villagers drove a stake through the corpse's heart. The second case, involving Arnold Powell, was even more extensively documented. Powell was a former soldier who had settled in the village of Medvedja. He claimed that years earlier he had been attacked by a vampire while serving in the military. Shortly after returning home, Powell fell from a hay wagon and died. Within weeks, 4 people in the village died, claiming that Powell had visited them at night. When his grave was opened 40 days after burial, his body was reportedly in a pristine state, with fresh blood flowing from his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. A stake was driven through his heart, and witnesses reported that the corpse groaned and released a fountain of blood. What made these cases different from previous vampire reports was the level of official documentation. The Habsburg monarchy, which controlled the region, sent military surgeons and government officials to investigate. They wrote detailed reports, conducted what passed for forensic examinations, and documented their findings in official records. These documents were then published and distributed throughout Europe. The effect was explosive. Suddenly, vampires weren't just folklore whispered by superstitious peasants. They were the subject of official government reports examined by doctors and witnessed by authorities. The cases sparked intense debate across Europe. Theologians, philosophers, and scientists all weighed in. Some argued vampires were real and represented demonic forces. Others insisted the reports were the result of ignorance and premature burial. The controversy raged for decades, from roughly 1725 to 1755, a period known as the Vampire Epidemic or the Vampire Controversy. During this time, rural areas of Eastern Europe experienced a wave of grave desecrations. Terrified villagers dug up corpses suspected of being vampires, examining them for signs of undeath and performing various rituals to prevent their return. Bodies were decapitated, hearts removed, corpses burned, or stakes driven through them. In some cases, entire cemeteries were exhumed. The hysteria was real, tangible, and widespread. But what was really happening? Modern historians and medical experts have proposed several explanations. The most compelling involves disease, specifically rabies and pellagra. Rabies, which spreads primarily through animal bites, was epidemic in Eastern Europe during the 18th century. The disease's symptoms are eerily vampire-like. Victims develop hydrophobia, a fear of water that causes them to avoid drinking and even to foam at the mouth from inability to swallow saliva. They become aggressive and may bite others, spreading the infection. Light sensitivity is common. Sleep patterns are disrupted. The connection to vampire folklore is striking. Even the transmission method matched. Vampire myths often featured shape-shifting into animals, particularly wolves, and rabies was primarily spread by rabid wolves. Pellagra, a disease caused by niacin deficiency, also played a role. When Europeans brought corn back from the Americas, they failed to adopt the Native American practice of nixtamalization, treating corn with lime to make niacin bioavailable. The result was widespread pellagra in populations that relied heavily on corn. Pellagra causes extreme sensitivity to sunlight, skin lesions, and mental disturbances. Sufferers develop a cadaverous appearance. In a population already primed to see vampires, pellagra victims might easily be suspected of vampirism, but disease alone doesn't explain the epidemic. The vampires emerged during a period of intense political and religious upheaval in Eastern Europe. Serbia was caught between the Habsburg monarchy and the Ottoman Empire. Poland was increasingly controlled by foreign powers. Bulgaria suffered under Ottoman rule. Russia was undergoing dramatic cultural changes under Tsar Peter the Great. These were societies under enormous stress, and the vampire became a focal point for anxieties about death, disease, foreign influence, and cultural change. Additionally, the decomposition process was poorly understood. When graves were opened weeks or months after burial, bodies might appear remarkably preserved, especially in cold weather or certain soil conditions. Blood might pool in the mouth due to gases building up in the lungs. Nails and hair can appear to have grown as the skin recedes. What looked like evidence of vampirism to terrified 18th century villagers was simply natural, if misunderstood, post-mortem processes. Austrian and German soldiers fighting the Ottomans in the region witnessed these vampire hunting expeditions and carried tales back to Western Europe. The stories grew in the telling, becoming more elaborate and sensational. Newspapers picked them up. Books were published. The vampire entered the European consciousness not as folklore, but as something that seemed supported by official evidence and eyewitness testimony. The vampire epidemic might have remained a curious historical footnote, but it coincided with the rise of Gothic literature in Europe. Writers began to see the vampire's potential not just as a monster, but as a character, a metaphor, and a source of sublime terror. The first significant literary appearance of the vampire came in 1748 with Heinrich August Ossenfelder's German poem, The Vampire. In it, a male vampire preys on young women, but interestingly, the vampire isn't undead, but rather a living man who is cursed. This early treatment shows the concept was still evolving. The breakthrough came in 1819 with The Vampire, a short story by John Polidori. Polidori had been Byron's personal physician and was present at the famous gathering at Villa Diodati, where Mary Shelley conceived Frankenstein. The same ghost story contest that produced Frankenstein also inspired Polidori to create Lord Ruthven, perhaps the first recognizable literary vampire. Lord Ruthven was aristocratic, sophisticated, and predatory. He moved through high society, charming his victims before revealing his true nature. This was revolutionary. Previous vampire tales had featured creatures that were obviously monstrous. Ruthven, by contrast, could be anyone. He represented the threat of the outsider who infiltrates polite society, the charismatic predator who hides behind a veneer of civilization. The story was hugely successful and sparked a wave of vampire fiction across Europe. Subsequent decades saw vampires appear in various literary forms. James Malcolm Rymer's Varney the Vampire, serialized in the 1840s, introduced several elements that would become standard: the vampire's fangs, his aristocratic background, and his tormented existence. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, published in 1872, presented a female vampire in a lesbian relationship, exploring themes of forbidden desire and predatory sexuality that Victorian society found both titillating and terrifying. These works prepared the ground for the novel that would define the vampire myth for generations to come. On May 18, 1897, an Irish author named Bram Stoker published a novel that would transform vampire fiction forever. Dracula wasn't the first vampire story, and many of its elements were borrowed from earlier works in folklore. But Stoker synthesized these disparate threads into something cohesive, creating a vampire that felt simultaneously ancient and modern, foreign and familiar, monstrous and magnetic. Stoker spent 7 years researching European folklore and vampire mythology before writing Dracula. He was particularly influenced by Emily Gerard's 1885 essay, Transylvania Superstitions, and conversations with the Hungarian scholar Arminius Vambéry about Balkan folklore. He visited Whitby, the English coastal town that features prominently in the novel, and did research at its public library. The dedication to research shows in the novel's rich detail and authenticity. Count Dracula himself draws on multiple sources. Stoker likely encountered references to Vlad III Dracula, the 15th century Wallachian prince known as Vlad the Impaler, while researching. Vlad was notorious for his brutal tactics against the Ottoman Turks, particularly his habit of impaling enemies on wooden stakes. His name, Dracula, meant son of Dracul, referring to his father's membership in the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to defending Christianity. Though the historical Vlad wasn't a vampire, his reputation for cruelty and his dramatic name made him perfect inspiration for Stoker's antagonist. But Dracula is more than just a renamed historical figure. He embodies Victorian anxieties about a number of threats. As a foreigner coming to England to establish himself, he represents fears about immigration and foreign influence. As an aristocrat with ancient powers, he symbolizes the old world threatening the new. As a creature who preys on women and transforms them into sexualized beings, he embodies anxieties about female sexuality and the breakdown of Victorian propriety. Dracula is whatever the reader fears most. The novel's structure is innovative, told through journal entries, letters, newspaper clippings, and telegrams. Dracula creates the impression of documentary evidence. This epistolary format lends the fantastic story an air of verisimilitude. We're not being told a tale, we're being shown evidence. The novel even opens with a note claiming all the records are contemporary and accurate, a brilliant bit of framing that makes the impossible seem possible. Stoker established or popularized many elements we now consider fundamental to vampire mythology. His Count Dracula can turn into a bat or a wolf. He has no reflection in mirrors, symbolizing his lack of soul. He is repelled by crucifixes and garlic. He cannot cross running water without assistance. He must rest in his native soil. He casts no shadow. A stake through the heart or decapitation can kill him. Sunlight weakens his powers, though in the novel it doesn't actually destroy him as it would in later adaptations. These weren't all Stoker's inventions. Many came from folklore or earlier vampire fiction, but Dracula codified them, presenting them as a coherent system of rules that governed vampire existence. Future vampire stories would either follow these rules or deliberately subvert them, but they all had to engage with the framework Stoker established. The novel was well received upon publication, but wasn't an immediate sensation. Early reviewers praised its atmosphere and called it terrifying, though some thought Stoker included too much horror. The Daily Telegraph proclaimed it the best vampire story ever written, but financially the book didn't make Stoker wealthy during his lifetime. It was only in the 20th century, particularly after film adaptations, that Dracula achieved its iconic status. The vampire myth found its perfect medium in cinema. The 20th century saw Dracula adapted countless times, and each major adaptation shaped how audiences imagined vampires. The 1922 German expressionist film Nosferatu presented an unauthorized adaptation of Stoker's novel. Director F.W. Murnau changed the names and details but kept the core story. The result was genuinely unsettling. Count Orlok, as the vampire was renamed, bore little resemblance to the aristocratic figure of the novel. He was rat-like, with elongated fingers and a bald head, moving with an eerie, unnatural gait. Though the film was nearly destroyed after Stoker's widow successfully sued for copyright infringement, surviving copies ensured Nosferatu became a landmark of horror cinema. The 1931 adaptation of Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, established the vampire template for generations. Lugosi's performance was theatrical and aristocratic, emphasizing the Count's foreignness through his thick Hungarian accent. He wore formal evening clothes and a dramatic cape. His Dracula was hypnotic and sophisticated, seductive rather than overtly monstrous. Lugosi's portrayal was so influential that his version of Dracula became the default image in the popular imagination. In the 1950s and 60s, British studio Hammer Films revitalized vampire cinema with a series of Dracula films starring Christopher Lee. Lee brought physical presence and overt sexuality to the role. His Dracula was tall, powerful, and dangerous, with blood-red eyes and prominent fangs. The Hammer films added gore and eroticism that previous adaptations had only implied. They made vampirism explicitly sexual, emphasizing the act of biting as a kind of seduction. Lee's portrayal influenced vampire depictions for decades, establishing fangs as a visual must-have. Each of these adaptations modified the vampire myth, emphasizing different aspects. But they all maintained the fundamental characteristics. Vampires were creatures of the night. They drank blood to survive. They had supernatural powers, and they were both attractive and deadly. The vampire had become a cultural icon, recognizable across languages and borders. In 1976, an American author named Anne Rice published Interview with the Vampire, a novel that would revolutionize vampire fiction as thoroughly as Stoker had done 80 years earlier. Rice didn't just write about vampires. She wrote from their perspective, making the vampire the protagonist rather than the antagonist. This shift had profound implications for how we understand and relate to these creatures. Rice wrote Interview with the Vampire in a period of deep personal grief. Her daughter Michelle had died of leukemia at age 5, and Rice channeled her anguish into the character of Claudia, a child vampire trapped forever in a young body. The novel's exploration of eternal life became a meditation on loss, memory, and the burden of living when those you love are gone. The story follows Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, a vampire recounting his 200-year existence to a reporter. Louis is reluctant, tortured, and deeply conflicted about his nature. Unlike Dracula, who embraces his vampirism, Louis is repulsed by the necessity of killing to survive. He struggles with questions of morality, meaning, and existence. He is, in essence, a vampire with existential dread. Louis's maker, Lestat, represents the opposite approach, a vampire who revels in his powers and feels no guilt about hunting humans. The contrasts between them explores different responses to immortality and power. Can you be a moral vampire? Is it possible to retain humanity while being fundamentally inhuman? These questions gave vampire fiction a philosophical depth it had rarely possessed before. Rice's vampires differ from Stoker's in crucial ways. They can't go out in sunlight at all, which would destroy them. They have no reflections. They possess great physical strength and speed, but they're also creatures of emotion and culture. They appreciate art, music, and beauty. They form complex relationships with each other and struggle with the psychological weight of immortality. They're not simply predators, they're individuals with personalities, desires, and inner lives. The novel was controversial. Some critics dismissed it as superficial or overly erotic. Others recognized it as groundbreaking. Readers responded passionately. Interview with the Vampire became a bestseller and spawned a series of sequels known as The Vampire Chronicles. A 1994 film adaptation starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt brought the story to an even wider audience. Rice's influence on vampire fiction cannot be overstated. She transformed vampires from monsters into anti-heroes, from things to be feared into beings to be understood and even sympathized with. She explored their inner lives, their relationships, and their struggles. She made it possible to see the vampire not just as a threat, but as a protagonist worthy of our attention and, in some cases, our empathy. This shift opened the floodgates for sympathetic vampire narratives. Suddenly, vampire stories could be about identity, belonging, and the struggle to maintain humanity in the face of monstrousness. The vampire became a metaphor for anyone who felt different, outcast, or trapped between worlds. The vampire myth continues to evolve in the 21st century, adapting to reflect contemporary concerns and desires. The creatures that once symbolized disease and death have been transformed into symbols of power, sexuality, and the outsider experience. Stephanie Meyer's Twilight series, beginning in 2005, brought vampires to a new generation of readers. Meyer's vampires sparkle in sunlight rather than burning. They can survive on animal blood rather than human. Her vampire, Edward Cullen, is protective, romantic, and anguished, struggling with his desire for the human protagonist Bella. Twilight was phenomenally successful, particularly with young female readers, though it also sparked intense debate about its portrayal of relationships and gender dynamics. Television series like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, True Blood, and The Vampire Diaries explored vampires in ongoing narratives allowing for complex character development and world building. These shows presented vampires as individuals rather than monolithic monsters. Some were villains, others were heroes, and many existed in the gray area between. They dated, worked jobs, formed friendships, and navigated the same social challenges as humans, just with added supernatural complications. The vampire has become a flexible metaphor. In some stories, vampires represent immigration and assimilation, struggling to maintain their identity while fitting into human society. In others, they symbolize queer experiences, with the closeted vampire serving as an allegory for coming out. Teen vampire stories often use vampirism as a metaphor for adolescence itself, with its bodily changes, dangerous desires, and sense of being caught between childhood and adulthood. Critics of modern vampire fiction argue that the creatures have been domesticated, stripped of their essential monstrousness, and turned into romantic figures who pose no real threat. They point to sparkling vampires and vampire-human romance as evidence that we've lost something vital about what makes vampires frightening and meaningful. Defenders argue that the vampire myth has always evolved to reflect the concerns of each generation, and that exploring different facets of vampire existence expands rather than diminishes the tradition. What's undeniable is that vampires remain popular. From highbrow literary fiction to romance novels, from prestige television to blockbuster films, vampires continue to captivate audiences. We return to them again and again, finding in their impossible existence something that speaks to very real human experiences and anxieties. So why do vampires endure? What is it about these impossible creatures that continues to fascinate us thousands of years after the first stories were told? Part of the answer lies in the vampire's fundamental nature. They exist at the boundary between life and death, the ultimate liminal beings. They're human enough to understand and relate to, but inhuman enough to do things we cannot. They break the rules that constrain us. They live forever, while we age and die. They possess power and freedom we can only imagine. In this sense, vampires represent wish fulfillment, the fantasy of transcending human limitations. But vampires also embody our fears. They represent the violation of the natural order, the corpse that refuses to stay buried, the family member who returns as a stranger. They symbolize disease and contagion, particularly relevant in our current era of global pandemics. They remind us that death is not an ending but a transformation, and that transformation might not be benign. Vampires are also supremely adaptable. Unlike some mythological creatures tied to specific cultural contexts, vampires can be transported anywhere, reimagined in countless ways, and made to represent whatever a storyteller needs them to represent. They've been monsters, heroes, lovers, and everything in between. They work in horror, romance, comedy, and drama. They can be terrifying or sympathetic, ancient or modern, solitary or social. Perhaps most importantly, vampires are about appetite and transgression. They exist in a state of perpetual hunger, driven by needs they cannot ignore. This makes them powerful metaphors for any kind of desire that society deems unacceptable or dangerous. Sexual desire, certainly, but also ambition, rage, and the hunger for power or immortality. The vampire does what we're told we shouldn't, and in doing so, they let us explore those forbidden territories safely. The vampire myth has traveled from ancient Mesopotamian clay tablets to Hollywood blockbusters, from folklore whispered around fires to best-selling novels, from creatures of pure horror to figures of romance and sympathy. They've been demons and anti-heroes, monsters and metaphors. They've adapted to every culture they've encountered, reflecting each society's unique fears and fantasies. Today's vampires may sparkle in sunlight or struggle with existential questions their folkloric ancestors never contemplated, but they still serve the same essential function. They help us confront our deepest fears and desires in a form that's both safe and thrilling. The journey from the Ekimmu of ancient Mesopotamia to Edward Cullen of Twilight is a testament to the vampire myth's extraordinary flexibility and enduring power. These creatures have survived millennia, precisely because they can transform to meet each generation's needs while retaining their essential nature. They are death that walks, hunger that never ends, and power that comes at a terrible price. As long as humans fear death, crave immortality, and struggle with the darker aspects of desire, vampires will continue to haunt our stories. They are the shadow self given form, the part of us that wants to break free from mortality and morality alike. In confronting them, whether in terror or fascination, we confront ourselves. The vampire isn't going anywhere. Like the creatures themselves, the myth is immortal, endlessly dying and being reborn in new forms for new audiences. From Mesopotamian demons to Slavic revenants, from Bram Stoker's Count to Anne Rice's Tormented Immortals, from Bela Lugosi's mesmerizing performance to today's supernatural romances, the vampire continues to evolve, adapt, and thrive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the origins of one of humanity's most enduring myths, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to History Scrolls for more explorations of the legends, folklore, and mysteries that have shaped human civilization. The darkness holds many more secrets waiting to be uncovered.